Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are presenting 99% the same policy choices. But when Bernie Sanders presents those policy choices, he calls them socialism. And when Elizabeth Warren presents those policy choices, she calls them capitalism. And they're the same policies. They are very fundamentally and genuinely even the same specific tax reforms, the same social programs. It's the same slate of priorities and proposed new legislation. But one of them calls it socialism and one of them calls it capitalism. So there's a problem here.
So if you're going to sit here and say, well, there are failures of capitalism, yeah, of course I'm going to agree with you. I'd be an idiot not to. I lived under a lot of those failures. But it's not fair when I say, hey, your system failed to address this or failed to do this, for you to point and go, well, these are still some problems under capitalism. Sure, but we're not having everybody in the state of Arkansas or Texas die because of some famine and then killing people when they try to escape the country. Somebody finds out about it, right? One, there's a difference in scale. And two, I'm not claiming that capitalism on its own in the purest, most libertarian pipe dream system will fix all of these problems. Capitalism needs to be heavily regulated. The profit interest doesn't always work in the public favor. But I don't think you can just say, well, because there are problems with capitalism, let's try central planning, when central planning has not effectively worked for any economy ever. The difference is we have to be a little bit more honest when we look at why certain people die or why certain things happen under economic systems. So in the United States, when somebody goes to the hospital and they can't afford to get some test to screen for cancer and then they later die of it because they didn't catch it early enough, this is a failure of capitalism. We have the resources. They're literally right there and the person can't access it. Okay? That is 100% a failure of capitalism. When you have a people who are told to stop farming and then food isn't rationed to them and all of their crops are requisitioned by the central government as a part of central planning, and then those people starve, 3.5 to 7.5 million of them, that is a failure of central planning, of socialism or communism. Do you agree, or do you think that these two things are fundamentally different?
All right. We are living through a period of time when the meaning of the word socialist is being redefined in the mainstream media, in mainstream political discourse, not just in the United States, all around the world. And then on the other hand, the concept of socialism is being used insincerely by left-wing extremists, by communists, crypto-communists, to hook and draw in a broader public, to draw in more public interest and support for an ideology that most people find abhorrent, morally repugnant, and ahistorical, by which I mean they find it to be based on lies about history in the same way that the neo-Nazi movement rests on lies about history. Let's talk about the mainstream use of the word socialist first and foremost. That is changing right now. And the way in which the meaning of the term has become slippery and unintentionally deceptive, i.e. it's deceptive even when people don't mean to deceive you, it can be shown in contrasting the rhetoric of Bernie Sanders to the rhetoric of Elizabeth Warren. Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are presenting 99% the same policy choices. But when Bernie Sanders presents those policy choices, he calls them socialism. And when Elizabeth Warren presents those policy choices, she calls them capitalism. And they're the same policies. They are very fundamentally and genuinely even the same specific tax reforms, the same social programs. It's the same slate of priorities and proposed new legislation, but one of them calls it socialism and one of them calls it capitalism. So there's a problem here. Now, on a very practical level, if I were a gambling man, I would bet that in the future, within the next 10 years, we're going to see the Bernie Sanders approach collapse, that his style of rhetoric will cease to be popular, and we're going to see the Elizabeth Warren style of rhetoric succeed. Elizabeth Warren says of herself, quote, "I am a capitalist to my bones." That's her approach. But she is presenting a set of priorities, again, the same as Bernie Sanders, that many people today would describe as some kind of moderate socialism. Now, what is moderate socialism? Or what do moderates mean when they say socialism? I think the turning point here was the turning point in the popular perception of these options for the future, not just in the United States, but in Europe, in Australia, in many places in the world, was a 2015 film by Michael Moore. So this is a film that was titled Where to Invade Next. The title is a joke. Michael Moore is a famous documentary filmmaker. My claim here is not that everyone on Earth saw this film. My claim is that everyone who is employed in the mainstream media saw this film. The type of people who sit at CNN and even Fox News, whatever, the type of people who sit and broadcast on the radio and on TV, media professionals, they all saw this film. And that's because Michael Moore is the darling of that social class. In this film in 2015, Michael Moore nakedly and directly and honestly makes the argument that the United States should imitate high-tax countries in Europe. It is an argument that the United States should have higher taxes and higher quality social programs delivered to the public, paid for by those taxes. So if we take Denmark as the example of this, and please remember, Denmark is a capitalist country. It really is. Denmark is a free market capitalist country, but it's a country with high taxes and high quality social services. If we take Denmark as the example here, then we could call this the Denmarkification of the United States of America. Now, if we took Japan as an example, we could talk about the Japanification or Japanization of the United States of America. But it was mostly focusing on examples of affluent countries in Western Europe that Michael Moore put together this argument. Now, another rhetorical approach to this is Bernie Sanders, currently on his campaign, standing in Detroit, standing in the United States of America in Detroit, and pointing across the river to Canada and asking the question, why is it that in Canada getting prescription drug benefits is so much cheaper than the United States of America? Why can't we just imitate Canada? This would be the Canadianization of the United States of America, which does not take too much imagination for Americans to relate to. But I have to emphasize again here, like the contrast between Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren, a conservative Christian Republican politician could have just as easily made that argument. It would have been dynamite for anyone in the Republican Party to go and stand on the river and point across the river and ask, why is it that when Americans get sick, they have to pay this much money for this medicine, and when Canadians get sick, they have to pay this much money? There's nothing inherently left-wing about the argument. There's nothing inherently socialist about the argument. There's nothing Marxist about it. This is a concern that could be expressed by conservatives. I even can say it should be expressed by conservatives. In the same way, when Bernie Sanders points the finger at China and points the finger at Mexico, Bernie Sanders openly uses the rhetoric of saying China and Mexico are stealing American jobs. That is paleo-conservative. That is the definition of conservative in terms of the last 50 years. His whole policy position on imports, protectionism, trade, and even migration, both legal and illegal immigration. Bernie Sanders is, in effect, a conservative. Now, of course, Bernie Sanders takes these policies and packages them and presents them to the public as socialist. Again, Elizabeth Warren, almost the exact same policies, packaged and presented as left-wing capitalist, right? So we have a problem here. The fundamental problem is that since the breakdown of neoliberalism, almost all of these terms have been bending to the point of breaking. It's becoming almost meaningless. It's like we're going down a highway and the meanings of the signs on the side of the highway, there are signposts, and the signposts use words that once had a very clear and simple meaning. But today they have to have a footnote and a paragraph of text to let you know what these words really mean. Right now, what does socialist really mean? The discourse in the United States of America that's now influencing the whole world is a form of moderate socialism that really means capitalism with very high taxes and very high quality benefits provided to the public with those taxes. That's what I mean. And really, historically, that's not the meaning of socialist. Even economically, it's not the meaning of socialist. And Bernie Sanders himself will openly say he does not support the government taking over ownership of private enterprise. His definition of socialism is not about public ownership of the means of production, say state subordination of the free market. That's not what socialism is for him. And that's why exactly the same policies that he presents as socialist can be presented by Elizabeth Warren as capitalist. Woo! I'm tempted to end the video there, but here's the problem. We also live through a period of time when this mainstream use of the word socialist is being cynically employed by people on the far left, by crypto-communists, who want to create more sympathy for communism through the overly vague and misleading use of socialism. And two, there are communists who are actively trying to recruit new members and supporters and followers through a series of stages of first saying, oh, well, do you agree with socialism as defined by Bernie Sanders? And then asking, oh, well, can we get you to agree with anti-capitalism, with blaming capitalism, with this other? Oh, now step three is, can we get you to participate in making excuses for the historical failures of Lenin, Stalin, Mao Zedong? Can we start to get you to participate in a kind of ahistorical revisionist history? Can we, and now can we fully radicalize you? That is going on at exactly the same time. And that is, to me, profoundly disturbing, immoral, and really sickening.
And it's basically, the little boy who cried wolf. They say, oh, you can't have free healthcare. That's socialism. They say, fine, I'm a socialist. And that's really what's going on with the Bernie Sanders debate right now. And I think it's amusing. And it shows that the hysterical anti-communism has kind of taken the taint off the word, or the onus off the word. People aren't afraid of the word anymore. I think that's good. But I must say that socialism is not the government spending money. It's not progressive taxation. That kind of thing goes on in every society to some degree or other.
So when you say socialism, so are you implying like a fully planned economy then?
Now, well, you'd have to define what a fully planned economy means.
If you ask the average American what is socialism, the answer they would probably give you is stealing money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Okay? I'm not here to defend the average American sentiments for socialism or communism. That's absurd. However, your counterpoints are just as propaganda-laden to try to say that industrialization in the Soviet Union was successful, even though these were done on the backs of massive famines that were a great showcase of the failures in central planning as a support for central planning.
Famines never happen under capitalism. People never starve under. I mean, this is obscure, and then you take a couple isolated famines and make them the characterization of an entire country industrializing and becoming a superpower. This is ridiculous. That would be like me saying that the mass deaths in the U.S. Civil War prove that American capitalism doesn't work. That would be like me saying the Great Depression proves that capitalism doesn't work. I mean, that's ridiculous.
You could
a whole country becomes a global superpower, invents space travel, electrifies the entire place, is building some of the biggest hydroelectric power plants in the world. People that lived in huts are suddenly living in modern apartment buildings with electricity, but none of that counts because there was a famine along the way.
What's going on here in this debate from the far left perspective, the crypto-communist perspective, it's not as spontaneous as it may seem. For them, the crucial challenge is to get you in the audience, to loosen your grip on reality, to be willing to take that step from fiction into nonfiction, to make you a believer where you're willing to start participating in these lies about the tragic history of the Soviet Union, the tragic history of China under Mao Zedong, under communism, where you're willing to valorize and make excuses for some of the most despicable and notorious dictatorships in the history of the world. If they can get you to do that, they've won. And that is the sense in which they're taking the moderate use of the word socialist, and they're making it into bait on a hook. And what I see happening on the internet again and again and again is people taking that bait, and they're basically conditioning themselves to be more receptive to communist propaganda without realizing that that's what they're buying into when they take the first step of basically settling for a policy package that is no more socialist than Elizabeth Warren or the modern state of Denmark. These are the dangers of how ideology gets packaged and repackaged in the 21st century on the internet.
I mean, really, people like to disrespect my crew, but the fact is that you know my name and I don't know you.